Let's dive right into it. The 2014 FIFA World Cup in Brazil. Today, we're going to look closely at a tournament that was, honestly, defined by absolute extremes. Because on one hand, it delivered some of the most dramatic, high-scoring, and truly historic on-field moments in the entire history of the beautiful game. But on the other hand, the off-field realities surrounding the event were intensely complex and, frankly, pretty sobering. So throughout this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this massive event unfolded, looking at both the spectacle and the shadows to discover what really happened. Right out of the gate, just look at this staggering figure, $11.6 billion. That is exactly what it cost to put this tournament together. At the time, that made the 2014 Games the single most expensive World Cup in the history of the sport. Planners originally estimated it would cost somewhere just over $1 billion, but the reality of building and renovating stadiums, plus all those massive infrastructure projects, it pushed the final number completely into the stratosphere.
Which brilliantly illustrates the core question we're going to explore today. Was the most expensive World Cup in history actually worth the price tag? Because as we go through all these incredible athletic feats and remarkable innovations, we also have to weigh them against the monumental human and economic costs required to bring the whole spectacle to life. Keep that dichotomy in the back of your mind as we move forward.
All right, let's get into Section 1, setting the stage in Brazil. You know what's really fascinating here is just the sheer geographical footprint of the event. The tournament was spread out across 12 different host cities. This was designed to cover all the main regions of Brazil. Everything from the iconic, renovated Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro to the newly rebuilt Estádio Nacional in Brasília. But practically, this meant the 32 participating teams were facing some incredibly long-distance travel and wildly different climates. Still, despite those logistical hurdles, the draw was incredible. The country welcomed 1 million international visitors from 202 countries, and a massive 5 million people gathered at the official FIFA Fan Fests. It was huge.
Moving right along to Section 2. High-tech and high heat.
So an absolutely crucial piece of the 2014 puzzle was innovation. For the very first time at a World Cup, FIFA introduced goal line technology. Basically, to avoid any more controversy over ghost goals, they installed this crazy system featuring 14 high-speed cameras mapping the goal area. If the ball completely crossed the line, the referee's watch would literally vibrate and display a signal. It was a total game changer. And that wasn't the only tech upgrade. Referees were also given this new vanishing water-based spray to mark the 10-yard line for free kicks, and Adidas introduced the Brazuca, a newly designed, thermally bonded 6-panel ball just to improve aerodynamics. But of course, all that tech had to contend with Mother Nature. The Brazilian climate, especially up in the northern venues, was incredibly demanding. And this brings us to another big World Cup first: mandatory cooling breaks. FIFA used something called the Wet Bulb Globe Temperature Index, which measures both heat and humidity together. They mandated that if the temperature exceeded 32 degrees Celsius, which is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, players would get a mandatory 3-minute break. This officially kicked in for the first time during a highly intense round of 16 match between the Netherlands and Mexico.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Group Stage Shocks.
Just look at this massive spike. The 2014 group stage produced a staggering 136 goals. To put that into perspective for you, that is just 9 fewer goals than the entirety of the 2010 tournament. And draws? They were practically non-existent at first. We didn't see a single drawn match until the 13th game of the tournament. That was a drought of draws we literally hadn't seen since the very first World Cup way back in 1930. The attacking football was just absolutely relentless.
And naturally, with all those goals came some massive upsets. The biggest shockwave by far was the defending world champions, Spain, getting eliminated after just 2 games. That was the quickest exit for a defending champion since 1950. Meanwhile, you had Costa Rica going on this absolute Cinderella run. They won a group of death against 3 former World Cup champions, Uruguay, Italy, and England. No way anyone predicted that. The unpredictability was just off the charts.
All right, let's turn up the heat. Section 4, the historic knockout stages. Once we hit the knockout rounds, the breakout stars really started to shine. While established giants like Germany's Thomas Müller scored 5 goals and Brazil's own hometown hero Neymar scored 4, it was actually Colombia's James Rodríguez who completely stole the show. He secured the Golden Boot with 6 goals. That marked the first time a Colombian player ever won the award. The individual brilliance on display here was truly historic.
But out of all the history made at this tournament, absolutely nothing is as prominent as this single scoreline, 7-1. Just take a second to let that sink in. This was the semifinal match between the host nation, Brazil, and Germany. To this day, it remains one of the most stunning, unbelievable results in the entire history of international sports.
Let's unpack the sheer historical weight of that single 90-minute game. For Brazil, it was their biggest defeat since 1920. It was literally a national trauma, played out in front of nearly 60,000 of their own fans in Belo Horizonte. But for Germany, it was an absolute masterclass. They became the first team to reach a record fourth consecutive semifinal. And within that very same match, Germany's Miroslav Klose scored his 16th career World Cup goal, breaking the all-time scoring record previously held by Brazil's own Ronaldo. It was a devastating day for the hosts, for sure, and a deeply historic triumph for the eventual champions.
And that leads us right to Section 5, Glory at the Maracanã.
So the final comes down to Germany squaring off against Argentina. This was actually a record third time these two nations had met in a World Cup final. It was an incredibly tense, fiercely contested match that stayed scoreless all the way through 90 minutes. But then, in the 113th minute of extra time, Germany's Mario Götze controlled the ball on his chest and struck this beautiful half volley right into the net. That single, spectacular goal secured Germany's 1-0 victory and handed them their fourth world title.
Now, this victory wasn't just a big deal for Germany. It represented a massive geopolitical shift in the sport. Just look at this timeline. Germany's win marked the third consecutive title won by a European team, following Italy in 2006 and Spain in 2010. But even more significantly than that, Germany became the very first European team to ever win a World Cup on the soil of the Americas.
But now we need to shift gears a bit. Section 6, the tournament's true cost.
Slowing down for a moment, we have to acknowledge that the infrastructure required to host this mega event came with a devastating human toll. During the rush construction of the stadiums, 8 workers lost their lives. In Belo Horizonte, an unfinished overpass that was built as part of the World Cup infrastructure actually collapsed onto a busy highway, resulting in 2 fatalities and 22 injuries. Furthermore, to make way for all these redevelopments, the homes of thousands of families living in Rio de Janeiro's favelas were cleared out. For instance, the favela do Metrô near the Maracanã, which housed 700 families, was completely destroyed.
And when you combine those harsh realities with the $11.6 billion of public money spent on the event, it sparked immense public anger. Now vai ter Copa, meaning there will be no cup, became a huge rallying cry. Massive protests and demonstrations erupted all across Brazil, both before and during the tournament. Citizens were deeply frustrated that billions were being poured into brand new stadiums instead of essential public services. The discontent was actually so vocal that FIFA entirely scrapped speeches at the opening ceremony, just to avoid the boos that had targeted officials a year prior at the Confederations Cup.
And those controversies surrounding safety, they didn't just stay off the pitch, they actually extended right onto it. FIFA faced intense, severe criticism regarding how they mismanaged head injuries. The absolute most glaring example happened in the final itself. German midfielder Christoph Kramer took a very heavy blow to the head, but he was allowed to just continue playing. He collapsed minutes later, and it was eventually revealed that he was so disoriented, he actually asked the referee if the match he was playing in was the World Cup final. It raised some major red flags about player welfare on the world's biggest stage.
So we come full circle back to our central theme. 171 goals were scored. Records were completely shattered. A champion was crowned. But 8 workers died, thousands of people were displaced, and $11.6 billion were spent. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. When the stadium lights finally fade and the fans go home, does the incredible spectacle of the beautiful game justify the devastating shadows it leaves behind? Ultimately, what is the true legacy of the 2014 World Cup? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this complex and fascinating topic. Until next time, keep learning and keep asking the big questions.